All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew Sullivan. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at No One Left Behind. I have the privilege of leading our advocacy efforts. Those are our efforts both with the administration on Capitol Hill and really the public at large to let people know about the issues facing our special immigrant visa population and other wartime allies. Really excited that you guys are joining us today. We had our first webinar back in, I believe, September, where we had Ambassador Ryan Crocker, General David Petraeus, and our Executive Director, Mike Mitchell, talk about the importance of the SIV program. And really excited now to give you kind of a look at what we're doing to really advocate for our allies. I know it's been a long time coming, but we're excited to share this update. We're lucky enough today to have some recordings that I did with Rep. Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat out of Oregon, and Rep. Brad Wenstrup, a Republican out of Ohio. I know many of our allies and many of the folks that care about our allies feel like there's nothing nothing happening in Congress right now. But they'll give you a glimpse that there are some great congressional champions that really want to do right by our allies. So with that, I'm actually going to kick it off with the video.
Hey, for everyone on the call, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Andrew Sullivan, the Director of Advocacy here at No One Left Behind. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Rep. Earl Blumenauer. Rep. Blumenauer is the representative for Oregon's 3rd District. He's a lifelong Portland native. He's been a member of the House of Representatives since 1997. He currently sits on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. And although that committee doesn't have direct jurisdiction for special immigrant visa issues or Afghan issues, he's been a tireless advocate and really a great congressional champion. So we're excited to have him here today and have a few questions for him. And Rep. Blumenauer, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure. I deeply appreciate your commitment to keeping our responsibility for people who depended upon us as we depended on them.
Well, thank you so much, sir. It's very much dependent on leaders like you in Congress. And so we would just kick it right back to you for all that you do. My first kind of question to you, sir, I think some people have realized, how pressing Afghan and SIV issues are, in the last 2 years since the U.S. withdrawal. But really, you've been talking about this and have been a champion since the early 2000s. What's kind of your background? How'd you get involved? How'd you realize it was going to be an issue? And if you could just kind of give us your background on why it's important to you, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to. And it started for me with a group of high school social studies students in Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon. And they were working with a young Oregon National Guard lieutenant to try and rescue a woman who was his interpreter from Iraq. And it was really touching watching these young people and the teacher work to be able to, and ultimately they were successful. They were able to fight the system and bring her to safety, actually in Oregon. And that led me to a partnership with the late Senator John McCain and Senator Ted Kennedy, who were my Senate partners on this. We set up the original SIV program, fought to be able to work through the various bureaucratic hurdles that you know all about, to say the very least. And it's been almost 20 years. And there's little that I've done in public service that I'm more proud of than what we've been able to do to make sure, as our friend Ken Johnson wrote in his book, so that being a friend was not fatal.
That's great, sir. And you touched on something that I think is really important. I think for a lot of people, their exposure to the SIV program has been, just Afghanistan and the U.S. withdrawal. But as you touched on, we have SIV programs that have taken care of Iraqis, and that's been a pressing issue. And so, the leadership on both of those major fronts of the global war on terror has been truly incredible. Let me ask you this. I think for some people, they think, okay, we're now no longer, the Operation Iraqi Freedom is over. We've left Afghanistan. How is this still kind of a pressing problem? Can you kind of just briefly address the reason why it's still so important to kind of champion SIV issues?
Absolutely. Well, we have people, Taliban, ISIS, brutal people with long memories. And there are still people in Iraq and Afghanistan who are at risk. The Taliban swept in to Afghanistan, and we've been working efforts to try and bring people now to safety. One family, the father was killed, the son was imprisoned and tortured, put one of the women in the family in prison where she was raped. These people are cruel. They have long memories. And we continue to have them on the firing line. Being able to commit to our working to get them to freedom, to move them from safe house to safe house. Frankly, one of the big problems we've had from the beginning is that this program was not set up with a priority by the Department of Defense, by the State Department, Homeland Security. This is a tangle of bureaucracies and paperwork that has never been given the resources that it needs. And it has had a serious problem in terms of backlog moving people through. It's tragic. We've had a number of these folks who have died even after they've been cleared because we couldn't process them fast enough. So it continues to be a challenge getting enough of the special immigrant visas, working it through the bureaucracy, and then logistically getting them to safety.
I could not agree more. Kind of from our perspective, I think that, you know, making the SIV program what it should be, certainly what you and the late Senators McCain and Kennedy intended. It's going to take, you know, additional acts of Congress. It's going to take the Biden administration all to kind of work together to make sure that we're getting these wartime allies out quickly, and, you know, removing them from the threat of the Taliban and ISIS and other you know, terrorist regimes that are out there. Kind of to that point, what are some things right now that you think Congress could do? I know you've been a champion on the Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act. You know, if you want to briefly kind of talk to us about what those would do and why we think they're so important for fixing this problem.
Absolutely. Well, the Afghan Adjustment Act would provide a pathway to legal permanent status for Afghans that are relocated to the United States with the humanitarian parole status since the withdrawal. Without the Adjustment Act, tens of thousands of Afghans who've been actually relocated to the United States, including those who supported our mission in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, face tremendous legal uncertainty. We also need to pass the Afghan Allies Protection Act to extend the Afghan SIV program for 5 years and authorize an additional 20,000 special immigrant visas. This is critical to be able to help these people who are in the pipeline navigate coming to a strange country, being able to have their place in the line protected. This, to me, is the least we can do.
Could not agree more, sir. You know, from No One Left Behind's perspective, we're supportive of something we developed called the Allies for U.S. Principles. And it's the idea that we need to evacuate the at-risk, protect the folks that have already made it here, but may not have, you know, a permanent pathway forward that's clearly delineated. And then also just guarantee that America keeps its promise to everyone that is served by or on behalf of the U.S. And so I think that these two bills that you have been a great champion for really, you know, address that, you know, evacuating the at-risk and making sure we're protecting the folks that have made it during the evacuation. And so really appreciate that. What are some things that, you know, on the call, we've got a whole bunch of people that care deeply about this issue, that have been supportive. They've been great volunteers to No One Left Behind. But what are some things that they could do to maybe encourage Congress to join in on your legislation and really see this move now, because the time is dire?
Yes. Well, I think there's no substitute for people in Congress hearing from their constituents about why this is a priority. You know, I want to be clear that some folks have had some concerns in terms of security, bringing people in there. They don't want to have, you know, embedded terrorists. Well, these are people who risk their lives to help Americans with their mission. We could not have done what we did in Afghanistan. I don't care how you feel about the Iraq or the Afghan war. These people supported military, supported humanitarian, supported diplomatic and logistic efforts. These are people who made it possible for Americans to survive. A number of them, and I've heard, you know, heart-wrenching stories, literally risked their lives, saving American service people in the line of fire. And you think for a moment about how disorienting some of these folks, when we actually get them out, they suffer from PTSD. They're in a strange country. Many of them don't have the language skills. You know from your experience, Andy, navigating this bureaucracy is hard for sophisticated people, let alone folks who are traumatized coming to a strange land. We need to make sure that we make this path as smooth as possible. And I would make one other observation. The United States relies on foreign nationals who help us all around the world. These are people who work in our embassies. They work on our aid programs. They are guides and drivers and interpreters. These are people that extend the opportunity for America to be able to function overseas. They are absolutely essential. And for us to not give them the time and energy and the protection that they need, I think is unconscionable. And if we don't do this, it's going to have severe consequences, not just for people that we're fighting to protect now from what happens in foreign countries. We try and get them out or help them navigate when they get here and still subject to challenges at home. This is a message to anybody else who's thinking about helping the United States overseas. Do we keep our commitments? Are we a reliable partner for people who in some cases risk their lives to help America diplomatically, militarily, and in terms of humanitarian assistance? We need to make sure that we reward their sacrifice and protect them.
Could not agree more. Yeah, as a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, I knew how paramount local nationals were to everything that we did, from, you know, combat patrols to trying to develop democracy and women's rights, and could not agree more. And for the folks on the call, you heard it from a member of Congress. There is no substitute for calling your member of Congress and telling them this is important to you. And so we will have resources for everyone to reach out and, you know, identify who their representative and senators are, and make sure to tell them how important this issue is. Rep. Blumenauer, I know how big. Oh, please, sir. Yes.
Let me just make one other point, Andy, and it would be great if we could help some of these folks identify people in their communities, those who have been successfully relocated or those who are struggling to relocate. These are amazingly inspirational stories. I think they're very powerful, and being able to work together. You know Janice well. I was at the National Airport when he got off that plane with his wife and children. It was so emotional, and a U.S. captain who championed Janice, who actually saved his life on the battlefield. These stories are so touching. Young families that are becoming established, expressions of support from people like you who've been there, who know how important it is and lend your voice to it, being able to highlight these stories in any community where they settle is very important. It helps these folks know that their sacrifice was appreciated and that we welcome them. But it also is, I think, a lesson for us all about the bravery and the commitment of people like you and others in the military and non-government organizations who are committed to help the United States fulfill its responsibility to these brave partners. And so I would recommend that they reach out to you to see if there's somebody in their neighborhood, in their city, in their state, that they could meet, that they could celebrate, that they might be able to spotlight, because these are extraordinarily powerful stories, and we all benefit from getting to know them better.
Yes, sir. Could not agree more. You know, I think it can be abstract for certain lawmakers and they see pending SIV applications, but really there is a person and a story and a family behind all of those, and exposing them, you know, to that reality is the way forward. And so for everybody on the call, you've heard we got some homework assignments here. So if we care about SIVs, let's make sure we're telling their story. Rep Blumenauer, I know you're a busy man, and so I don't want to keep you any further, but I have really enjoyed the conversation. We really appreciate all that you've done, both in the past on behalf of America's SIVs and are still doing. And so from all of us here at No One Left Behind, we just want to say a deep thank you, sir.
Well, Andy, we're all in this together. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I look forward to people on this call joining us in this effort. And we really appreciate the work that you've done with the organization that plays a vital role in keeping America's commitment to our allies.
Thank you, sir.
So in addition to being joined by Rep Blumenauer, we were lucky enough to interview Brad Wenstrup, a Republican from Ohio. He is up next.
Hey, thank you much, everyone, for joining us today. We're lucky enough to have Rep Brad Wenstrup. He is the representative for Ohio's 2nd District. He's here with us today. Rep Wenstrup is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, as well as the House Intel Committee. He's been a member of Congress since 2013. In the past, he served on the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Committees. He also is a retired colonel, having spent 25 years in the Army Reserve. He's also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So we're really lucky to have him here today. I think he's got a very unique perspective on the SIV program, and we're excited to hear from him. So, sir, thank you much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, firstly, sir, I guess let me ask, why is the SIV program important to you? I imagine you've got a relatively unique perspective, having been a veteran and having served alongside interpreters. So would love to hear why it's an important issue for you.
Yeah, it's very personal, as you might imagine. You know, you really have a bond with those that are serving with you. They worked with us, they lived with us, and they died with us. When I was in Iraq, we lost 2 of our interpreters while we were there, and you do have a bond, and many of those bonds never have broken for many of us, and myself included. And I can tell you that before I was in Congress, I actually signed for 2 of my interpreters as the military officer that had worked with them. Pleased to say that right now, one of them is a cardiologist at Ohio State University and a U.S. citizen. The other is also a U.S. citizen, and he's doing family practice medicine in Texas. So these were prime people to work with us in our combat support hospital. I served as chief of surgery at Abu Ghraib prison. And, they came there to try and be a liaison between the people of Iraq and the U.S. military and the U.S. military doctors. They were studying medicine at the time. One of them planned to stay and help the Iraqi people going forward as a physician, but someone identified him. That they went after his family. They tried to kill his family. They went into hiding, and he contacted me. I signed for him. I got elected to Congress. He still wasn't here, so I called in immigration and I said, "Where is this guy? Can we move this along? His life is in danger." And we were able at that time, this is going back to 2013, able to get him to the United States. And now you know the rest of his story. These are proud Americans, believe me. And that's why it's so important to me. And when I look at how we left Afghanistan and how we saw this coming for so many of our interpreters and those that have stood by us, and those of us in uniform, Jason Crow and I, we served together on Intelligence Committee, and we tried to get things done. We actually did get some new parameters done to try and speed up the bureaucracy, but unfortunately it wasn't acted upon by the State Department. And then our withdrawal from Afghanistan was based on a date rather than on terms. Those terms should have included that we have the possibility and the opportunity to get out those, not only U.S. citizens, but the SIVs, as we call them, those that qualify for a special immigrant visa, to be able to exit safely and come to America through a process that is safe and sound for them. And so now we're still trying. We are definitely still trying. No one left behind, right? And these are our people, if you will. These are the people who put their lives on the line each and every day. And unfortunately, we've lost many of them because we didn't get them out ahead of time. So we're still trying to work on this. Early this year, I co-led the Afghan Allies Protection Act with Jason Crow. We're trying to bring some stability and efficiency to the SIV program and get those that are eligible out of Afghanistan and fulfill our promise, right? Honoring our promises. We had our Honoring Our Promises group, a group of veterans in Congress, both sides of the aisle. We want to get these things done.
That's fantastic, sir. Well, and as someone that, one of my proudest achievements in the Army as well was signing as a recommender for two of my interpreters. And so I think for a lot of us, that feeling that you have, we're all kind of equally proud of that from our service. Now, you just mentioned the Afghan Allies Protection Act. I'm very familiar with it. No One Left Behind is incredibly supportive of it. But for some of the folks on the call that maybe are relatively new to this or aren't as familiar with that legislation, can you just briefly, sir, kind of talk about what that is going to do and how it's going to improve the Afghan SIV program?
Well, one thing is we want to increase the transparency of the program itself, or the process itself, requiring the State Department to publish the strategy for addressing the persistent delays that we have seen and how they are going to address the backlog within the system. We really tried to address that legislatively, but really hasn't happened. So the transparency part is one of the things, and we're urging our colleagues in Congress to get behind this so that we as Americans are perceived on the international scene as we fulfill our promises. And right now, it's not really going so well. So it aims to provide longer-term stability and greater efficiency to the Afghan Special Immigrant Visa Program. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Again, honor our promises, put in a process in place, let America see and the world see that we are doing this to the best that we can, considering the environment that we're in today.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things you talk about transparency, and one of the things that I love most about the Afghan Allies Protection Act, there's a section in there that has a yearly reporting requirement on the 1059 SIV program. That was the original SIV program that the State Department came out with. It's an opaque program, but that's actually still being used to process Iraqi SIVs. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about your legislation is that, it's going to do a lot of good for Afghans, but it's still going to have some follow-on effects as well for improving, the SIV program that is still operative for Iraqis. So really appreciate that. Now, one of the other aspects that I like about it is it has 20,000 additional visas authorized as part of it. I know that in the Senate's Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, those 20,000 visas are in there. We haven't seen that in the House Appropriations bills. For the folks on the call, what is a call to action for them, so that we can try and get other members of Congress to lead in the same way that you and Rep. Crow and Rep. Blumenauer and others have. What can we do to make sure we actually get this passed into law this year, this Congress?
It's the usual grassroots efforts that we would really love to see. Anybody who has any interest in this, or just, they may not know someone, they may not have ever served in the military, but they understand what it means to America to honor our promises, and contact your senator, contact your representative, and let them know that this is an important issue. And it's important for the standing of America in the world, in my opinion. How do we ever go into another engagement and want to have the support of the people on the ground from the country that we may be in, and earn their trust? So this is a matter of Americans enabling ourselves to keep trust in other areas of the world, especially for those that come and serve beside us. And so make our colleagues here in the House and in the Senate very aware of the importance of this and international relations and just who we are as Americans.
I could not have said it better myself, sir. I think that is dead on. And when you look at, one of the sources of America's strength is when we go abroad, we have local national partners that know they can rely on us, and making sure we've got that in the future is critical. And so I couldn't agree more. Well, sir, I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you so much. And we really appreciate all the great work that you've done in the past and continue to do on behalf of America's wartime allies.
Yeah, this is an American issue. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue. And I think that's the point that we have to make to all of those serving here in the House and Senate and in the White House.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to say thank you very much to both of those members for helping to pre-record those videos. I wanted to show them because I know there is a sense that Congress is not working, and admittedly, it's not. Right now, Congress has anticipated that today is their last day in session. Senate may extend and be in session tomorrow, but that'll be their last day for the year. And so far this year, there is going to be no SIV or allies, legislation that's going to have been passed. So I get the feeling of being despondent. Believe me, I feel it as well. But I wanted to show that to tell people that, there are still some great congressional champions that are fighting on behalf of our allies, both Republicans and Democrats, both in the House and in the Senate. You saw two House members there, but, you have some great senators as well. Senator Shaheen, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Graham, Senator Moran. There are a lot of people that care about our SIVs, that have not forgotten about them, be they, Afghan SIVs or Iraqi SIVs. And so really this was a message, I hope, of hope. For the next part of the webinar, really where I'd like to discuss is kind of get into the nitty-gritty of, what is happening with the SIV program, what is happening with legislative efforts, and what everyone on the call can do to help. So firstly, I want to remind everyone of the principles that No One Left Behind uses in our advocacy. We'd come out with these earlier this year, but as a reminder, there are three of them, and we think all three need to happen to really keep our promise to our allies. So those three are, firstly, evacuate. So we want to evacuate all of the folks that are at risk of reprisal due to their service with the United States. Secondly, we want to protect the folks that have arrived here. We want to make sure that they are, protected from return, that they have a durable pathway to, remaining in the U.S. And then the third one is we want to guarantee the promise globally. So right now, there is a, Iraq program that is relatively moribund. There's an Afghan program that certainly needs plenty of fixes, but unfortunately, we don't have a global program. And so you look, there are Syrian nationals, there are Somalis, there are Yemenis. Throughout the Sahel, you've had, brave folks that have stepped up and served on behalf of the U.S. as interpreters, and yet we don't have a program for them. So, for us, our advocacy efforts are going to focus on how do we make sure we keep the promise, not just to Iraqis, not just to Afghans, but to anyone that has decided to serve alongside us. So with that reminder, I'll now talk about what I think is, obviously the most urgent kind of situation, which is the Afghan SIV program. So the figures that I'm going to give you, these come from the most recent State Department quarterly report. That report captures data as of June 30th. So it's important to remember this is kind of a lagging report, and we're nearly 6 months past where this was, but some key figures from there. Firstly, the Afghan SIV program unfortunately only has 13,187 visas left to issue. Again, that's as of 30 June, though. And if you look at how many visas had been issued in that quarter, we were averaging about 1,300 visas per quarter. So if you imagine that in the last 6 months, we've issued another 2,500 visas, that 13,000 is actually down, and we're potentially, nearing 10,000 visas left to issue. So we only have 10,000 visas left to issue. However, we had 148,912 pending SIV applications. So, we are well below 10% for all of the applications that are pending. Now, we know that not all 148,000 are going to actually end up being bona fide SIV claims. But even if we look at the historic COM approval rate, and we can also talk about the fact that, there are plenty of great people that have been excluded from getting COM approval. But even if we take the historic COM approval rate of about 37%, we're still left with 55,000 principal applicants that are out there that deserve an SIV. And unfortunately, we only have, probably around 10 to 11,000 visas to issue them. So certainly very concerning. When you realize that, with each principal applicant usually comes historically on average 4.2 family members, the scope of the problem seems really dire. Now, historically, we've been adding about 4,000 visas per year to plus up that Afghan SIV program. As I mentioned, unfortunately, this year we have not. We have unfortunately failed. Congress has not done so. I'll kind of detail some of the great bills that are out there that we hope to see actualized into law here shortly. But again, unfortunately, in 2023, they were not. So some of the bills that would go a long way to helping. Firstly, I'll talk about the Afghan Allies Protection Act. So the Afghan Allies Protection Act is the bill that really focuses on Afghans that have been, left behind. Those Afghans that are currently, hiding from the Taliban in Afghanistan or are in Pakistan, facing possible deportation from the Pakistani authorities as they've kind of cracked down on Afghans, even those Afghans with, legal documentation to be in Pakistan and with pathways out of Pakistan. So the Afghan Allies Protection Act really is focused on helping those populations. Firstly, it authorizes 20,000 additional visas, so it would plus us up to, roughly 30,000 visas left to issue. Additionally, it extends the life of the program another 5 years. So it would allow, until 2029, folks to submit their application, which is really important. It would take it out through the next presidential election, making sure that we have the time to process all of those really, really critical SIV applications. Some other things that it does that I think are really important, it actually extends SIV eligibility for folks that are wounded or injured in combat. So currently, if you are let's say you were a combat interpreter and you were working on behalf of a U.S. Army unit, if at day 345 of your service, you struck an IED while out on patrol with that Army unit, and you unfortunately had an amputation or some sort of injury that prohibited you from continuing to serve, you are not SIV eligible. SIV eligibility is only conferred upon 365 days of service. So you could be, all of 3 weeks short of making that qualifying service, but because you were injured, you're not SIV eligible. That's crazy to me. So this Afghan Allies Protection Act would make that common sense fix and confer SIV eligibility for those folks. Additionally, one of the other really important things, it would allow for virtual interviews. The fact that there is no, U.S. consular services in Afghanistan really confounds how we process SIVs. So this bill would allow for virtual interviews. And as you heard me say in the interview with Rep. Brad Wenstrup, it also would provide reporting on the 1059 program, not directly related to the Afghan SIV program, but it would be really important making sure we've got that permanent pathway. It's a permanent SIV program. So, providing more information on how those SIVs are being processed, incredibly important. Second bill I want to talk to you about is the Afghan Adjustment Act. The Afghan Adjustment Act has some great things for both Afghans that were evacuated during the non-combatant evacuation operation. That would have been in August of 2021. But then it also does have some good effects for Afghans that may be in Central or South Asia as well. So firstly, the Afghan Adjustment Act would provide for domestic adjustment of status for those folks that were evacuated from Afghanistan. It would do so with another round of security vetting. I think, we had heard that there had been some concerns. I don't have those concerns. I know that the folks that we evacuated are great, dutiful folks that are, ready to be fantastic and patriotic Americans. But it does do another round of security vetting to make sure that we have, the right folks that we want to be here. And then it provides them a more easy pathway to long-term permanent residency, not making them go through a broken asylum system. Other things it does, it expands SIV eligibility to some really crucial populations. That would be the female tactical platoon, female members of the Afghan National Security Forces, members of the Afghan National Army Special Operations Command, pilots, members of the Special Mission Wing. We think that's really critical. Those are people that have, unique skills that we train them with. And unfortunately, they are now at unique risk of reprisal from the Taliban. So expanding that SIV eligibility is really important. And lastly, the Afghan Adjustment Act, tasks the administration with making sure there's a long-term strategy, that we have, a permanency, a permanent strategy to make sure that all of our Afghan allies get out and we're able to resettle them, that we leave no one behind. We think that's really important. So these are two bills we're really passionate about. We would love to see passed as soon as possible. Now, one of the questions that we'd gotten is, there has been some kind of changes. How have the bills moved? What are the bills' names? I would just say, if you're reaching out to your member of Congress, make sure you tell them Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act. Now, the way the bills will likely be passed is not going to be through what we call regular order in the Congress. It's likely going to be attached to, other legislative vehicles. This year, we really pushed hard to try and attach portions of Afghan Adjustment Act and portions of Afghan Allies Protection Act to the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the yearly defense bill. Unfortunately, that did not happen. It was ruled out of order on germaneness grounds. That said, we still have other vehicles that are moving that we think are going to be really good, viable pathways to accomplish this legislation. So, there's currently a supplemental funding bill that's being debated. That very well could carry a lot of this legislation. There's also, the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bills. Those are the bills that fund the government. Those need to be passed by January or February, depending on the specific appropriations bill. So there's a lot of opportunity still out there. The best way that you can advocate on, fixes to the SIV system, legislative fixes to the SIV system, is to tell your member of Congress to support those two standalone bills, the Afghan Adjustment Act and the Afghan Allies Protection Act of 2023. The actual mechanisms that they pass, that really isn't germane. Just showing that people still care is the most important aspect of it. Next up, I kind of want to talk about, one of the targets that we have for next year, and that is the permanent SIV program. I had just mentioned the 1059 program. We think that's a really important one, but that program has some serious limitations. The program does not have a sunset. So it's a permanent program that will, unless there's some change to law, just continues every year. The limitations, however, are that it's limited to 50 visas per year. It's only for Iraqi and Afghan interpreters, so it's not as broad as the Afghan program is in who can actually qualify for it. It also requires a letter of recommendation from either the chief of mission or from a flag officer, so a really senior person in either the diplomatic or military space. That can make it a little unwieldy. And then, lastly, it's limited to the 50 visas per year, and that's only for Iraqi and Afghan nationals. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we expand that program. We would like to make sure that, yes, Iraqi and Afghan nationals are eligible for it, but for the interpreters that have served alongside America's special operators in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, in the Arabian Peninsula, we've had interpreters in Ukraine. We've had interpreters in the Philippines. Wherever someone has said, yes, we want to help America, and they have served alongside our forces, we'd like to make sure that if qualifying, they're eligible for an SIV. So we are going to work next year to expand that 1059 program to make sure that, regardless of where someone serves, they are eligible for an SIV. We also want to make sure that it functions a little better. It should not have to rely on a general officer to write a letter of recommendation for these interpreters. And, ideally, we'd like to see it expanded from 50 visas, which is not meeting the need, to something more. So that is one of the big things that I'm really excited about for next year. Obviously, still plenty of work to do with Afghan Adjustment Act, with Afghan Allies Protection Act, but we do want to make sure that we're also taking care of, the Iraqis, the Syrians, other folks that have served alongside us, and making sure we're making those necessary improvements. With that, let me pull up, bear with me here. We are going to take some questions and answers here. Okay. First one up. Apologies here. I'm looking at these in real time here. Okay, we've got one on the situation in Pakistan. So Matt Dedish, thank you for the question on what is happening in Pakistan. So I believe in September, Pakistan had made some proclamations from the government that they intended to deport Afghans that were seeking refuge in Pakistan. There have been, a series of tranches of Afghans that have sought refuge in Pakistan, going back as early as the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, but then also plenty of folks that had fled in the aftermath of the Taliban's takeover. The announcement was that Pakistan planned to deport up to 1.7 million Afghans. That's incredibly concerning. Many of these Afghans would face reprisal at the hands of the Taliban if they were deported. One of the really kind of ugly and unfortunate things that's happened is a lot of Pakistan society has kind of used this as an opportunity to target Afghans, and so you were seeing landlords suddenly increasing the rent. We were seeing police officers trying to solicit bribes. And so, unfortunately, we saw a lot of Afghans that self-repatriated, out of fear of what was to come, whether it would be, detainment or deportation, they self-repatriated. And so we've seen over 200,000 Afghans, unfortunately, leave Pakistan. That's the bad news. The good news is the U.S. State Department, I really think, has done a fantastic job in trying to work with the Pakistani authorities. I think they've gotten through, and Pakistan is being a more accommodating partner in this. Pakistan has very real security concerns, but they are now realizing that, okay, the best way to deal with this is for those Afghans that have a pathway out of Pakistan, that have valid immigration documents for Pakistan, they're not being targeted. And so really applaud the State Department. They've stood up a hotline in Islamabad. It's both a telephone and a WhatsApp service that will allow for Afghans that are facing detainment or some other kind of issues like that to contact the embassy, and they've been fantastic in making sure that those folks are supported. And so it's a concerning situation, but I really think it's thankfully improving, although a concerning one. Let me see. I've got a question here from Nicole, and the question is, I thought that ACT was being dropped from Afghan adjustment because we were trying to get it in must-pass legislation. So, Nicole, you're clearly a nuanced player in this. Yes. So there is negotiations going on right now for the supplemental, again, the supplemental funding bill that looks at funding Ukraine, Israel, and then also the border. As part of that, there has been discussions that maybe the compromise legislation won't actually say Afghan Adjustment Act. It'll say Afghan Adjustment. What that looks like specifically, I think, is still in flux as negotiators are still working on it. And so, because there's not an actual piece of legislation that's out there to say, hey, please support this, I would recommend that for everyone on the call, revert to the bills that are out there that are introduced on a bipartisan and bicameral basis, because just showing support for those bills is the signal that they need. The actual specifics of Afghan adjustment versus Afghan Adjustment Act is not really I don't think necessary for a lot of people. So I would encourage, folks on here to, call your member of the House of Representatives, call your senators, and tell them to support the Afghan Allies Protection Act and Afghan Adjustment Act. And next one. This is one from Ron. Are interpreters actively still being extracted? Yes. We're not going to delve too much into what, movements out look like. But yes, there are people moving out of Central and South Asia now. No One Left Behind has a part in that. I think we're looking at doing a future evacuation focused webinar that may be able to speak more to that. But, in partnership with the great team at the State Department and other nonprofit partners, yes, there are still people that are flowing out of Afghanistan and out of Pakistan. And so, we're thrilled to see that. We hope the pace continues, if not picked up. So, yes. And I think actually we'd scheduled 45 minutes for this, so I think we're at time. What we're going to do, though, I know there are some more questions that are out there. We're going to be able to download those, and we can reach out to you just based on your registration to answer the remainder of those. So with that, I think that ends the question and answer portion. The last thing I would say is, really appreciate you coming to this. So much of if we're going to see success in the SIV program and success in standing by our allies, it's because, everyday Americans are concerned and involved and, activated in supporting Afghans. And so I really appreciate your attending here. The last thing I'll do is, make some pitches for how you can continue. I've talked at length about reaching out to your member of Congress. Please do so. But some other ways that you can get involved. No One Left Behind, really the lifeblood of the organization is volunteers. So I'd encourage you to go to nooneleft.org and look at ways that you may be able to volunteer. We've got an exciting new mentorship program. We're in desperate need of mentors. You'd be paired up one-to-one with a recently arrived SIV, but to help them, navigate the employment scene in America. For a fresh arrival, it may be a little confusing. So leverage your professional skills and advice and help them, empower themselves economically. That's an incredibly important one. Also, donations. I mean, candidly, this evacuating people, resettling people, it has a cost. We don't receive any kind of government funding. So if you can, we obviously encourage you to donate as part of our end of year campaign. If you can't afford to, that's fine. Just share it so that maybe someone that who can donate does make that donation. So again, really appreciate everyone's time. Really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much and have a good one.